Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. Before we start this evening's talk, I want to tell you that the work that I'm bringing to you, some of it is my own. I certainly have contributed to this work, but it is also the work of a group that I'm part of called the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child. And we are developmental and neuroscientists that meet regularly to go over what we know about development. We know about these different topics. We argue, we fight. We try to make sure we've got the right story, the right answer to the question, what most people would agree who are scientists would be true. And then we work with a group called Frameworks Institute to try to figure about a way to communicate those ideas because scientists are notoriously terrible at talking to real people. That's what we get trained in, is not being able to talk to real people. So we work with frameworks to figure out the metaphors and the similes and the things that will try to get this across, because we really, really want to influence the policymakers, the people like you, the public that affects what happens to children. We have and have known for a long time a lot about what it takes to develop healthy, competent, capable human beings. Forever there has been a gap between what we know and what we actually do. So we're working hard, and you will be part of this, to close that gap so what we know and what we do gets closer. I don't know what I did. And we can do good things for the children of our state, of our cities and our state. So now we're going to do a lot of this. The foundations for healthy development and a successful society get built early. Next. Healthy child development. Pillars of that are educational achievement, economic productivity, responsible citizenship, and lifelong health. If you get healthy development, that's what follows. And of course, those pillars are important. You're really good. For success, strong communities, a healthy economy, and a successful parenting of the next generation. This is why we care about kids, but this is why, if we care about society, we care about getting it right. Next slide, please. Now, building a healthy brain takes more than just having the right genes. It is good to have the right genes, and clearly you and not your siblings got them, right? It's good, but it takes more than that, because it also takes having the right supportive experiences. And in fact, we're beginning to learn that the wrong genes, i.e. genes that put you at risk for, say, depression, are the right genes in a different kind of developmental context, right? Why do we have so much variation in genes? Why can certain genes be at risk for disorder and have half of the population carrying them? Well, there are obviously going to be contexts in which they are the genes that support really positive outcomes. So it takes more than having the right genes. It takes having the right genes in the right context to develop well. And we're beginning to increasingly understand. Do you all hear me? And Matt, am I good? I'm not holding that close enough. Sorry, I knew I was doing something wrong. I wasn't getting enough laughs. We are beginning to understand that experience, what we experience during life, begins to actually write on those genes. It alters the way the genes function. This is an area that's called epigenetics. Let me try to explain a little bit how this goes. This happens in all of our cells of the body, but I'm talking about the brain, so I'll focus on that. Here's a little kid's brain. We're going to pull out a neuron, right? That's the main body of the neuron. The nucleus is there. We've got all this axons and so on. And when we experience, you know that in here we've got the nucleus. The nucleus is what contains the DNA, clink. Your chromosomes, clink. It really helps me to have a clicker. And we've got our DNA all wrapped around those little histones you see and all shoved into the nucleus of that cell. As we have experiences, clink. Oh God, this is terrible. Experiences, that sets up chemical messengers that talk and interact with our genes. And sometimes what happens is that places methyl marks of chemical marks on the genes that regulate the ease with which they turn on and turn off. Okay, this happens, much of it happens early in development. You know, when you get conceived, you're just a single-celled organism, right? By the time you get born, you got a lot more cells, and they all do different things, right? To have that happen, since it's the same DNA in all of your cells, some of those genes have to be silenced, and others have to be made more sensitive so that you have a heart cell and a liver cell and a brain cell, and they work differently. But nature keeps doing that over the course of our lifetime. And that helps to adapt us to environments, but it also can set us up for disorders. Okay, this is we learned about this from the cancer geneticists, but it's a more general thing that happens to us throughout life. So, next slide, to give you a sense of how potent and powerful this can be. This is actually a study of baby monkeys, rhesus monkeys. 4 of these baby monkeys were raised with their moms. 4 were taken away and raised on a cloth surrogate. So 4 of them were deprived of maternal care. And then when they were about 8 months old, they were sacrificed. I'm sorry, because we had to take out, I didn't do this, a friend of mine did it. I had to take out a piece of their brain. And in the piece of the brain, which was in the front part, the prefrontal cortex, they looked at over 1,373 genes, okay? And that's what's lined up from top to bottom. This is what's called a heat map. The color indicates whether they've been silenced or whether they're open to receive information. Does that make sense? Your genes have to get information to get them turned on or off. And what you can see, you don't need stats. You can see that these guys, who were the mother-reared ones, have genes that are regulated differently than these guys who were the deprived ones. Almost every single one of those 1,373 genes has been regulated differently as a function of whether they were raised with their mom or not. The brains got adapted to deprivation versus a responsive mom, and they will continue to function like that as the monkey develops. Now, life keeps happening, and some of this will change again. Right? It's not absolutely permanent, but it's a powerful way of seeing that what happens early changes the way the genes you have are capable of functioning. Did I make that? Is that clear enough? It's pretty wild. This is something we're all very interested in studying right now. It's not absolutely permanent, okay, but it biases you in certain ways. Next slide. Another way that we know that experience is really important for shaping the way your brain develops is that when we're born, this again, I've got a lot of prefrontal cortex. It's the front part of your brain, and this is a slice from a baby that died, and it's under an electron microscope. These are the neurons, and you know that in order for your brain to work, your neurons have to talk to other neurons, right? They have to connect at synapses, and if you notice, they're not connected much, which makes a lot of sense because newborns don't do algebra, they don't talk, they, all the things that the prefrontal cortex is important for, they're not doing yet. Then all of a sudden, under genetic control, this is gene timed, in this part of the brain, at 6 years, boom, all these connections form. So genetics say, whoo, make the connections, and then what's going to happen is the connections that you use will be the ones that you keep. That makes sense. This is a brilliant, brilliant plan that nature had, right? To be able to, we can think well about the stuff we think about, right? The stuff we don't have to think about, well, we don't think well about that. So what you think, the brain becomes what the brain does, is what I'm really telling you. What the brain processes, the work that it does shapes what it does, which is why you could be someone who lived in a country where snow and the type of snow mattered, and you could tell the difference between 10 different types of snow. We live in that country, but it's just, 10 different types of phone calls to get the, the guys to clear the streets, right? But if that was important to your survival, your brain would be able to process it. You go up there as an adult, and it's like, I can't tell, it's snow, whatever. Okay, by 14 years of age, we've begun to see that those connections have really been pruned. Now, this is the front part of the brain, Next slide. This process, which we think of as being sensitive periods for organizing different things, starts early, and it starts in the back of our brain. So we have those connections and we start pruning and organizing them in the back. The back is involved in vision and hearing and all those basic sensory things, which babies get reasonably good at, reasonably early. Next, you begin to process areas in the temporal lobe and so on, areas that are involved in language. Next. And then you get the higher order cognition going. But what you see, next, is that much of this gets set up in the first few years of life. And of course, as you're trying to solve more complicated problems, your vision and the way it organizes with your motor activity and your language feeds it. You never solve a problem with just one part of your brain. So skills beget skills. So the more your brain is better organized early, the more it can apprehend and understand, and the more you're capable of absorbing new information and thinking about stuff, which helps develop your brain. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. The more you can do, the more you can do. Or as Paul would say, we all do better when we all do better. The more we learn, the more we can learn. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that stimulation is really important for developing healthy brain architecture. And then you have to wonder what God was thinking. I usually don't use that, but this audience works. We are born among the most helpless of mammals on the planet. A newborn baby can't get its hand to its mouth. It can't roll over. It doesn't see very well beyond a few inches in front of its face. There's no way a human infant or young child can provide the information to itself that it needs to form a healthy and productive and competent brain. No way. So why are we not all incapable of functioning? Next slide. We came into this world expecting a context of relationships. The brain develops in the context of relationships, and relationships with parents, relationships with grandparents, siblings, and later peers and teachers. Relationships, you guys talked about it, relationships are the basis for healthy brain development, because if you have a responsive relationship as a baby, you can run an entire household, right? You are not helpless. The whole world evolves around you. One of my postdocs just had a baby. She brought her baby to work today because she's got to finally get back to work, right? And there's my entire lab playing with the baby, right? Nobody was getting any work done, but that was fine. The context, the basis for this is something we can talk about as a metaphor as serve and return. So we talk about it as interaction, but we got to think about it maybe as serve and return. So imagine that the baby's brain is formulating an idea for an action, right? That light is interesting, whoo, and somebody responds. And that brain gets a confirmation that the message it sent got responded to. Well, actually, there's biochemistry that happens in the brain that confirms that connection worked. Right? How does the connection know it worked? Because you produce an action, you get a response, right? So in a responsive environment, the actions that the baby is engaging in, the brain activity it's doing, is getting confirmed as working, right? Now this can happen in negative ways as well, right? So I do something and someone hits me, I'm learning something. It's maybe not what we want people to learn, so. But in a healthy environment, you're getting serve and return that's positive, and the brain is learning that the world is interesting. One of the things that we have been discovering and can show is that the barriers to education actually start earlier than we ever thought before. This is an old study. It was done in 1996, but it's been or 95. It's been followed up by newer data that I'll show you. It's the Hart and Risley study. What they did was they sent research assistants into the homes of families with young babies, and those research assistants recorded every word that the baby spoke, okay? And what they found, cumulative vocabulary, is that early on, before 16 months, families of babies in families where the parents were living in poverty and were not well educated themselves were no different, next, than high school educated and no different than college educated. Babies, in case you hadn't remembered this, say mama, dada, and that's about it, about this age. Between 16 months and 24 months is a period of language burst. And so as you follow that up, you begin to see that by 24 months, at least in vocabulary the child is expressing, we're seeing the beginning of the achievement gap. By 36 months, it's there. Now, we are arguing in this state about whether we should have preschool for 4-year-olds. Okay? Now I'm going to prove to you it actually is earlier, because this is what kids can say. You know, maybe you know, babies understand stuff before they say words, right? So language processing, in fact, talking to a baby in its first months helps set the brain up to learn language. Babies start processing language early. We are a language organism. It's one of the things that sets us apart. So in this next study, they used something called a Lina. It's a language recording device. The baby would wear it for a week. This was a study with 29 low-income Spanish-speaking families in Northern California. And for a week, they wore this Lina thing. And you can process the Lina data to know what language is being spoken with the child and what is language the kid is hearing around them. And they've organized this from the family where the kid heard the least. So I don't know what that would be, about 1,000 words in a week, right? What am I doing? Oh, I'm getting that too close to your mic, Matt. Is that what I'm doing?
That's not it. Yeah, we're on a separate system here. So.
I don't get it. Okay, goodbye. To the number 29, who is actually, the dark part is conversation with that child. So you can see there's this huge range, even in a low-income Spanish-speaking group, okay? Does it matter? So the next task that she had the kids do when they were, I believe, can I get the next slide to help my mind and my memory? How old were they? I don't know, I think they're 24 months. What, did you find it up there? 19 months, thank you. Is set the child in front of a screen, get the kids' attention on the X, and then you're tracking their eyes. And on one side of the screen, let's say there's a dog, a perro, and the other side is a cat, a gato. And you ask the child, where is the dog? Where is the cat? Mira el perro, mira el gato. Now, if I did that with you, and you knew gato and perro, all I would need to do is get to the p or the g, and your eyes would move, because you'd already figured out they're a cat or whatever. So what you're trying to know is how quickly can that child process this, all right? Does it make sense? I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that that's... and what you're seeing, this starts at 0 with the time. And about here, and that's where the p happens, we're about 800 milliseconds. So that's really fast. And what you're seeing is the kids who were hearing more, above the median words, having more conversations, are already processing that a lot faster than the other kids, okay? And they can't say cat and dog yet, but they understand the words and they're processing it. The thing about language is it comes at you in a stream. Now, baby ease is, look at the dog, oh, look at the dog. I mean, we repeat it, we help the kid with that. But still, words are coming in a stream, and the faster you can process them, the more quickly you can apprehend the whole sentence. Does that make sense? So it's happening young. It matters. And language, words are concepts. Concepts help us think about things. So the more language we have, the more things we can think about, the more we can manipulate in our minds, right? Skills beget skills. This, I want you to know, is not the end of the world, because brains keep growing. Okay, it's not all over at 36 months either. But what this is a study from Wisconsin, done in Milwaukee, of families at different levels of income, where they image the babies beginning at 5 months, multiple times out through 36 months of age. They're looking at the total volume of gray matter, which if you read Hercule Poirot, those little gray cells that help you think, okay? That's what they're looking at here. And of course, at this early age, they're not seeing any difference in the total volume. But what you see over time is by the time you're getting to 36 months, the children in high SES families have more gray matter. What that means is those dendrites, they're processes. They haven't lost cells, but they're more connected. There are more connections going on. There's more happening than in the kids from low SES homes. This can change with experience at 3 years. It's not over. But if we keep thinking about what you have helps you with what you're going to develop, we are thinking about bringing kids into the school system and playing catch up as early as 2 to 3 years of age, right? We don't have to. We can figure out ways so that we're not playing catch up. The kids can catch up, but it takes more work, more effort, more time. And of course, if they get placed in classrooms with kids that have bigger vocabularies, that have more connections, that are going faster, it makes it very difficult for the teacher with that kind of spread. And the kids themselves who aren't are beginning to learn something really horrible. I'm not very smart. By the way, the United States has a big, big problem. We think that intelligence is a thing that you, excuse me, he thinks that too, as a thing that we have, not something that we grow. So getting a growth mindset in kids early would be tasteful in this country, right? But we're beginning to work on that in schools. Next. All right. Oh, you can't see this. This says income to needs for children between the age of 3 and 5. More income to needs, the wealthier you are. And over there it says the size of your hippocampus when you are 6 to 8. Okay. Now, richer kids have parents who have better educations. That's not anything to publish. We know that. But, but there's no connection between parent education and the size of the brain. Richer kids, however, have parents who are using more positive discipline and less harsh discipline, and that is connected to the size of the hippocampus. So sensitive and responsive parenting. Richer families experience less stress. Red means it's a negative relationship. So there's less stress exposure. The more stress exposure, the smaller the hippocampus. So there are two things that are going into that thing that we were seeing before. Sensitive and responsive serve and return care that's not harsh but is warm and supportive, and less stress experience, fewer stress experiences. So we know what we need to target. Help parents provide more supportive care and reduce the amount of stress, if we can, on the parents and the negative, terrifying things that can happen to young kids. Okay? And when we do that, there's no link between how much you make and how big your brain is. So that there's no direct poverty link. It goes through pathways. Sorry that that was so hard to see. We're transitioning now into the part of the talk where I talk about stress, which is what I do. Research is me-search. But I want to make it clear that removing all stress from the lives of young children is really a horrible way of developing anybody. So we need to talk about, we've been thinking about this as sort of 3 levels of stress to try to communicate this. The first level is positive. Positive stress, you activate your stress biology, you feel a bit, you get a little bit scared, you get a little bit upset because you're trying to ride your bike and you're falling off, and learning how to ride a bike is really frustrating, and you cry a bit, and then you figure out how to ride the bike, and there are people there that are supportive of you. That's positive stress. You learn that you can manage and deal with stuff. There's tolerable stress. This actually comes from serious stuff, right? Like being in a car accident or having a parent die. But there are people around you that help you manage your stress response, that you can trust, and you can get through that. Many kids can get through that and may even learn that they are tough in the process. The toxic stress that people have been talking about, that we coined the term to get people to focus on, is when there's prolonged and frequent activation of the biology of stress, which is capable of affecting brain and body. And that usually it typically happens when there's the absence of supportive relationships, or when the people you need to go to for safety and security are the ones that are frightening you, or you're never sure if they're going to be with you or against you. Toxic stress. This is the stuff that is of concern for mental and physical development. Next. So, how do we know this? This is, some of you who have heard me talk love the story of the good and bad mommy rats. They're not good and bad, but they're high lickers and groomers or low lickers and groomers. So rats, just like humans, vary in their behavior, and they vary along a normal curve. And if you're a mommy rat, what you need to do to take really good care of your babies is to lick them and groom them a lot, especially around the butt, so there's really is not a translation direct to humans. And arch your back so they can get to your nipples, right? So the really good ones are high arch back nursers and lickers and groomers. And then there are the ones that are really low in those behaviors. They flop on their side, they lick them enough so they piddle, but that's about it, okay? And I have a colleague, Michael Meany, who has studies what happens when you look at the offspring of these high care moms. He takes the guys at the top and the bottom of these distributions. And what happens is if you take these animals when they are sort of young adults and you stick them in a restraint tube as if they were crawling underground and the ground caved in, it activates a pretty healthy stress response. It goes up, it comes down when they're taken out of the tube. Boom. Now, our low care guys, their response is different. It goes up, but it goes up higher and it stays up longer. And so it's going to have more of an effect on their biology. And what's interesting is, because you can do this in rats and mice, you can switch the babies from high to low care. So you can get rid of the genes and you get the same effect. So this is an effect due to experience. And these babies, I will tell you, when they grow up, if they're female, they will adopt the parenting that they got, and it's because the estrogen receptor for them has been altered epigenetically. Next slide. So this is an epigenetic effect. Do we see differences in stress hormone activity in kids, in human kids who are experiencing different things early in life? This is my bailiwick. This is what I do. I study stress hormones. If we look at middle-class US toddlers, and we look at how normal a stress response they have, about 10% will look a little bit atypical, but that's, if we came back, they'd probably look okay, right? If we take neglected children who are in foster care, removed from their home because of neglect, or kids that have been adopted from orphanages soon after their adoption, it's about 30 to 35% show atypical altered stress hormone patterns. Okay. They also show attention problems, externalizing behaviors that are predicted by the atypical patterns that we're seeing.